why UConn will be in the Big 12 this time next year. You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just want to take a moment to say just a big thank you for everyone that's downloaded the podcast, subscribed to it on YouTube. As of today, the podcast is currently the number one college basketball show on the Locked On Podcast Network. And it's because of fans like you who value great UConn content. We're proud to say we're the only daily podcast covering both the UConn men's and women's basketball programs, the absolute hoops capital of the world. And we're thrilled to bring you coverage you deserve. In today's show, we're going to talk about a little bit of football too. So it's a multi-layered show, and we want to show our gratitude. So we donate 10% of our revenue to Husky Ticket Project, helping send kids to UConn games. And we're making monthly donations to NIL wherever we can, and we feel that makes a big difference for us too. So if you're enjoying the show, take a moment to subscribe, follow, leave a review wherever you listen. Thanks again for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. Well, I have a special guest today. We're going to bring in Gabby Maljanian, and she's better known to you on the Locked On Network as Gabby Hurlbutt, the host of Locked On Red Sox here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Let's get Gabby in here, and I'm going to continue to intro her, and maybe we'll embarrass her with how amazing she is. Gabby is a wealth of sports knowledge. She's a former ESPN social media associate. She's a lifelong UConn fan, season ticket holder. She grew up 15 minutes away from Storrs campus. So whether it's baseball, basketball, and some football like we're going to talk about today, anything we throw at Gabby, she's got a passionate voice in the sports media world, and we're thrilled to have her on the show. Gabby, first question for you. Do you think that UConn will be in the Big 12 come this time next year?
I think it's definitely possible. I think the Fenway Bowl win was a huge factor in making their case for why they should be, because the football program, if you think about it and where they've come over the last few years in terms of competitiveness and being able to beat tough opponents and being able to attract good recruits for the program and being able to make their mark and get themselves to the Fenway Bowl after a fantastic season this past year. I think that was a big factor in it. And I feel like one of the biggest reasons why UConn didn't find success with getting into the Big 12 in the past is because of where the football program was at. And I think when you look at the last few years and what Jim Mora has done, I think that's going to be the ultimate game changer in terms of where UConn overall as an athletic program is right now compared to where they can be for years to come.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw this, but when this comes out on New Year's Eve, this is a special New Year's Eve Locked On UConn, Locked On Red Sox crossover. But no, what's amazing is Jim Mora is getting feisty. Did you see him in the media today? Essentially telling coaches, we see that you're cheating and we see that you're coming after our players when you're not supposed to right now. And the tampering in the portal, he kind of is channeling his inner Dan Hurley, and I really appreciate that. What'd you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's really fun to see him become more vocal, and I feel like since he came to UConn, he's always been known as being a guy who would express his thoughts, but not in necessarily the same capacity. Whereas Dan Hurley's personality has always been like that, just kind of not afraid to say whatever at any time. And I think the fact that Mora is becoming more confident and showing a little bit more of that personality, I think is really good for the program and good for what UConn is looking for. And clearly those are the types of coaches that succeed here. And I love that Mora has been able to feel like he's more comfortable with expressing the way that he feels about those types of things. And, when it comes to the portal and all of that, obviously UConn has established some really good players over the last couple seasons that it's natural that other teams would be gravitating towards those players. I just thought it was interesting how he put it out there in the way that he did, because it really just shows I'm here and I know what you're doing, and my team just won the Fenway Bowl and I really don't care anymore.
So true. Yeah, Jim Mora is getting super feisty. I saw t-shirts that say him Mora. A podcast partner of mine wants to do Himmy Mora Jr. shirts, and so I think for me, I love that, as you mentioned, like it's kind of part of the DNA of these coaches that are here. Whether we're talking about Dan or Gino, or before him Calhoun. It's just. It's kind of a prerequisite for a UConn coach to be a little feisty. So let me ask you this question: the attendance at the Fenway Bowl. Were you surprised by that? I mean, you're a Fenway gal. Like I'm sure you're there all the time. Almost 30,000 people there. I think it doubled Boston College, who is literally in their backyard, and we traveled to double them up. I think that's part of why we did that, so that we could embarrass Boston College too. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. We're like, we need to one up them for sure. And for me, yeah, I mean, this is somebody who goes to Red Sox games at Fenway all the time. And the environment was very much different, which is natural because it was a football game. But being there and seeing all those people there for UConn, and even seeing beforehand on Twitter, tickets are selling quickly. Like, you've got to get them.
Yep.
This could be a sellout game. That's really cool for UConn, because it shows that the fans are willing to travel and go to these places. And I think in a way it didn't fully surprise me because of what the attendance looks like at MSG when UConn plays there, and people will travel from Connecticut. And I think, growing up where I did, about 15 minutes from Stores, that's a very heavy UConn fan population. And Boston is not that far away from that part of the state. It's an hour tops to make that kind of commute from that area. And so I think people knowing this is a big opportunity for us to go see UConn play in this game, because we don't know, where they're going to end up next for their next bowl opportunity. And obviously the last time they were in a bowl game, they had to travel a lot further. And so for people to take that opportunity of they're playing in the vicinity of where we live, this is our opportunity to go out and rep the team now, which was the thought process I personally had, because I went with my dad to the game and we were like, yeah, we have to take this opportunity now when we have it. This isn't a guaranteed thing that they're going to be in the Fenway Bowl every year. We've got to take the opportunity now and do it. And I think a lot of UConn fans felt that same way of, okay, this is a big deal. This could be a huge win for the program. We need to go there and we need to see it in person, because there's not really an excuse not to. And that was another thing I really liked that Mora did, was he was really encouraging fans on social media to make it to the game, because UConn posted something about there being a viewing party on campus for people who couldn't go. And he was like, please make it to the game. It's only an hour commute. Like, we need all the support we can get. And I think people really took that to heart and said, there's not an excuse not to be there. We live so close to Boston. And I think that was ultimately the driving factor in people saying, we need to be there to support this team because they had a fantastic season and they have a good shot of winning this game. And I want to see them do it in person.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's so cool that you got to go. I think the thing that is, I think the only frustrating thing for me is when I do a football show specific to it, like when we did the live reaction show, or we did a show talking about how well they played, et cetera, there's always the naysayers, and even in UConn fandom, that are like, they don't want to give up the Big East. They don't want to give up the Big East. They want to give up Madison Square Garden. They don't want to give that up in terms of playing there for the Big East tournament. And they all say the same thing, which is if UConn is in the Big 12, they're like a 4 or 5 win team. And I don't think that people understand that doesn't matter. It's just, this year was a showcase to show that when they're given the opportunity to win games against teams that they didn't beat all the time last year, even though a win against Temple or Rice doesn't look attractive, to think that they were going to beat these teams 4 or 5 years ago when the football program was in the dumps, like, you would have taken those wins, right? So the idea is that you schedule yourself to be a 9 or 8 or 9 win team so that you can get into a Power 4 conference. You don't go play Kansas, Cincinnati, Houston, and Arizona and get killed just so that you say you played a tough schedule. That's the dumbest thing in the world. Like, men's and women's basketball don't do that. Like, you skate. So, like, Explain to like the novice fan that is concerned about if we go to the Big 12, like it doesn't matter because the money will be there. That's kind of the point. It's for the better of the athletic department. Do you agree?
Yeah, when it comes to the football program in particular, people like football and people are going to watch football. But if you're playing in a conference that's a huge football conference, naturally people are going to gravitate more towards UConn, talking about UConn and just focusing on games and being more attentive as to who's even on the roster. Because I think a lot of people could agree that generally football fans, or college football fans in particular, I should say, across the country, don't pay a whole lot of attention to UConn right now and who is on the football roster like they do schools like, big time schools. I mean, even a school like Oregon in the season that they're having, I'm sure a lot of people can identify a lot of the players on a team like that because they're used to seeing them on their TVs every Saturday. Whereas people aren't waking up in the morning like, I want to watch UConn,
Sure.
And I think going to a conference like that would put UConn in a little bit bigger of a conversation in terms of being more of a quote unquote football school like some of these other schools are. And naturally that transition is going to allow people to just pay more attention to them, which is what the goal of the school is just to attract that general attention. And I think by moving to a conference like that, you're attracting more of the general college football population of fans, not just people in this vicinity who like UConn.
Yeah, and we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, I want to pick up on that because to me, it's 1,000% about getting the attention so people know who UConn is from a football perspective, but it's also about filling the coffers financially and getting that football revenue money that the Big 12, the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 10 all get. Because let's face it, there were, 8 teams that finished under 500 in the Big 12. You don't give that money back. Like West Virginia doesn't have to give the money back because they went 5-7 this year, or Utah was picked to win the Big 12 and they came in almost last place. They're still going to get their TV money. So we're going to talk about that and what that would do to the basketball programs and the athletic department coming up after this. Have you ever looked at your bank statement and found charges for subscriptions you forgot or didn't even realize you had? I know I have. And that's where Rocket Money came to the rescue. It's like having your own personal finance assistant. Rocket Money found these sneaky subscriptions and canceled them for me in just a few taps. Rocket Money isn't just about canceling subscriptions. It's a personal finance app that helps you take control of your money. Whether it's finding and canceling unwanted subscriptions, monitoring your spending, or even lowering your bills, Rocket Money brings everything together in one great place. With over 5 million users and 500 million saved in canceled subscriptions, Rocket Money members save up to $740 a year using the app's premium features. For me, the subscription tracker has been a game changer. I've canceled a few services I wasn't even using anymore, and I've saved so much money, and I've used their goals feature app. It's helped me automatically set aside money for the future without stressing things like vacation, stuff like that. Take control of your finances with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Don't let those unwanted subscriptions drain your wallet. Start saving money today. All right, we're back live, but not really live, with Gabby Maljanian, and better known as Gabby Hurlbutt from Locked On Red Sox. Talking a little UConn to the Big 12. We're going to talk a little bit about the UConn men's upcoming game at DePaul in the last segment. But I have to tell you, this is kind of like a buffet of UConn topics. But the UConn women would be the immediate beneficiary of this move to the Big 12, because I did a show today that came out that will have come out yesterday when people listen to this, that essentially all of the UConn women's Big East games are going to look the same, which is not very competitive. They're going to dominate from the start. And then Gino's going to start tinkering with the lineup to see what he can figure out with the younger freshmen and things like that. So a Big 12 move to arguably one of the toughest basketball conferences in the country, I think would help the UConn women right off the bat. But do you like the move? Like, do you think it's weird? Like, I'm curious your thought process on that from a basketball perspective.
From a basketball perspective, I think it could make a lot of sense. Because the basketball program, with how much historic success that they've had in the Big East Conference, I think it might be time to start having that conversation of we need to raise the bar a little bit. And I think it would also help prepare them a little bit more for competition that they would see come tournament time in March, because the women in particular are so used to just blowing out other Big East opponents that when it comes to the March Madness tournament and they're starting to see all these other teams, I think them having more teams like that on their schedule throughout the season will teach them a little bit more about overcoming obstacles and facing difficult teams and having to navigate your way out of those situations. And I think when we've seen them come up short the last few years, obviously injuries have played a major factor for the women because they just can't seem to stay healthy year after year, which is upsetting. But I think in general, because they have a regular season schedule where they don't have to overcome a ton of barriers because the competition is just not at the same level as them within their own conference, I think ultimately in the grand scheme of things, it would help them to be more prepared for those bigger matchups. And I think when you make this kind of move, you do have to consider that there might be some bumps in the road. There might be some learning curves early on, and we might see some results on the women's side that UConn fans aren't used to seeing right away at the beginning. But I think that's something that they can adapt to. And with Gino, I know he's supposed to be here for a few more years coaching the women. So hopefully him being here to help ease into that transition for the women, there's nobody else I'd want to have here coaching the team when this transition happens on the women's side.
Yeah, and I think some people have said, well, why don't you talk about the ACC? I think the ACC has not made any overtures to us, and I don't think that I think the it would be more of a natural fit, but I also feel like the ACC could also be in the middle of being cannibalized as well. So I want to get away from the conferences that I feel like are failing, whereas the Big 12 has more refreshing ideas. They are constantly in like this growth mode. Like Yormark wanted UConn, as early as last year to kind of get the ball rolling. And obviously that fell through and they didn't get to a vote. But I do feel like with the success of the football team, the basketball teams in general bring so much. You talked about attention and eyeballs. The UConn women played the USC Trojans with Juju Watkins and Paige Beckers being the kind of the two, stalwarts for both of the teams. That was a 2.2 million viewer rating share. It outperformed every one of the football games in the Big 12 this year. So as far as ratings, a ratings bonanza, I know we don't get football money in basketball, but as far as what it would do for the conference, like the attractiveness of having both the brand of UConn women, UConn men, I think it's both. It's going to help both programs because as you look right now, the AP Top 25, it's not the end all be all, but there's 5 Big 12 teams in the AP Top 25. There's 2 in the Big East. So Big East is kind of on a downslide, and I don't want them to take our beloved Huskies with them. And I think we have the right mix of people with Dave Benedict, Jim Mora, Dan Hurley, Gino to kind of, rally the troops around this move. Do you see like anything as like a negative about moving to the Big 12? I know some people have talked about the travel being a concern. Do you think the good outweighs the bad in the long run?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some challenges with it. Like we saw with the traveling pretty far, that didn't pan out for the UConn men that well this year, traveling all the way.
Well, we wouldn't have to go to Maui though. We wouldn't have Hawaii's not in the Big 12. That's the good thing.
I don't think we should be going to Hawaii ever again.
I think if Andrea Hurley wanted to go to Hawaii, Dan would say, go by yourself. I think that's what he thinks about Hawaii at the moment.
He's like, I'm done with Hawaii. Never again. You can go by yourself on a solo trip. But yeah, the travel is definitely a factor. I think that's something to keep in mind here. And I also think generally when you're looking at cons of the move, you do have to think about that strength of schedule in terms of would this pose challenges in terms of UConn's ability to be one of those programs that can still make a big run and get into March and be one of those dominant teams. Because I know even with the UConn men's team, people talking about how UConn doesn't have a tough enough schedule during the year. That's why they, over the last few seasons, have been able to dominate as much as they have, winning the national championships because they didn't face the best teams in their run, all those kinds of things. And I think that would obviously eliminate some of that talk because they would know that the opponents that they're facing are more legitimate than they are in the Big East right now. But I do think there becomes that factor of, from a results standpoint, is it going to bring UConn down a little bit in terms of the success pattern that they have? Because are these programs that they're facing, are they in a level above where UConn is at right now? And I don't think that's something that we would really know till they get thrown into the fire consistently with those programs. But that is a risk that you're taking. Is there going to be are we going to see a little bit less of a level of success because of the competition that they're facing?
The only pushback I give you, Gabby, on that is like, I think the numbers bear out that the Big 12 is better than the Big East. But when it comes to like conference play, and you can just see it in the first two games of this year on the men's side, every team is playing UConn right now like it's their Super Bowl. And, you know, the level of play is like ratcheted up. Like Xavier shot like 54% from three and lost. You know, they made 29 field goals on only 9 assists, which means they were making like incredible like shot making. It wasn't like through a system. And then, you know, you go on the road to Butler. It's an 11 o'clock game in the morning. So there's plenty of challenges in the Big East. I think overall, like the fact that it's a bigger conference, you play it's more of like a perception thing, right? If you look at who's in the Big 12, you'd have a conference game against Kansas every year, a conference game against Arizona. You'd have a Bobby Hurley, Danny Hurley duke it out, Arizona State versus UConn. Like the idea of some of those attractive games outside of the football money is why I'm drawn to the Big 12, because I still think the Big East is viable with the Marquettes, the Creightons, the Villanovas, even the Georgetowns of the world, because those are names too. But I don't love like what we're going to talk about here in the next segment, that it's taken a monumental resurgence for DePaul to be even relevant. And now Seton Hall has taken kind of like a step back. So I think the Big East has a little more of that going on in the Big 12 because of the resources that the Big 12 has for NIL and other things. And unfortunately, that's what it comes down to, which is money.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different, factors in it when it comes to the attractiveness. And like, I think there's a lot of games that basketball fans in general would be drawn to from some of the storylines that you mentioned. I think it's just a matter of, is UConn going to be able to compete with all of those teams? And I think, it's a matter of the types of players that they have on both teams at the time. And is UConn in a position to where they can create competitive games against all of those opponents? And I feel a lot more confident that they can from a basketball perspective, a lot more so than football, that's for sure. But I think, when you take the whole big picture of it, that could be a challenge for some people to accept. Is, it might be a lot closer games. It might be a lot more of a grind for UConn to have to win when they're in that conference.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's nostalgia, right, Gabby? It's like, I always age myself. I'm 43 years old. That's the reason why us old guys will go see like a Karate Kid legacy movie that's coming out with Ralph Macchio. That is probably the corniest thing in the world, but it's like makes you feel like you're 12 years old again. So and that's what the Big East does. Like the Big East reminds me of my childhood, taking buses from Meriden, Connecticut with like all of my family members to go watch the Big East tournament. And if that goes away, you kind of lose a little piece of, your childhood or whatever you want to call it. So I think that's a big part of why people are resistant. It's not so much that you're going to play a crap ton of quad one games against the Kansases of the world. It's just like, oh man, I don't get to go to MSG on the weekend. I have to play the conference tournament in Kansas City. That sucks. Like that part of it absolutely sucks. So I think that's a big part of it. And we're going to transition away from all this hypothetical talk. Next segment, Big East basketball, DePaul coming up for UConn in Chicago, January 1st. We're going to come back and talk about it. All right, back with Gabby Maljanian. I'm still getting used to saying her name, so I apologize if I said it. I think I hesitate, but I think I got it right.
Yeah, you got it.
All right, great. So we got this game against DePaul, Jan 1. Am I right about that? I'm pretty sure. I'll double check that as I ask the first question. But DePaul has made a huge turnaround with Chris Holtzman. They have like 11 transfers. It's nuts. They haven't played a ton of teams. They're our home. They've been playing a lot better at home. They got crushed by St. John's in Queens. I expect this to be competitive at first, but I think UConn is going to pull away just because, and I hesitate to say that because DePaul is a really good three-point shooting team. What's your sense of this game? Do you feel like DePaul hangs in there? I don't even know what the spread is.
I think for the first half, we might see them hang in, especially because of the fact that we have seen UConn start off slow in games this year and having to figure things out, and teams are able to hang in there. But I think once some time passes and UConn's hitting their shots, I don't think DePaul's a viable matchup to be able to compete with what UConn has. I think you mentioned the three-point shooting. That's going to be a big factor. I think if UConn can defend the three and be able to not allow them to get on these big runs from three, I think that's something that's helped them to win a lot of games this year so far. So that's something that UConn's going to have to really hone in on. And we haven't always seen them play the sharpest defense this year. And I think even somebody like Samson Johnson, who defends really well in the Xavier game, for example, like it was definitely a noticeable difference not having him. And I think having him present in this game could be huge for UConn when it comes to their ability to lock in and stop the three, because that's the biggest thing for DePaul that they found a lot of success with. They have some great shooters on the team. I just don't necessarily see it aligning with UConn. And from an offensive standpoint, I think UConn's just too much of an offensive powerhouse for them to be able to have answers. So I really don't think it'll be a close game, but I could see some people at first maybe getting a little bit nervous because DePaul's hanging in because of the fact that UConn has had that issue with starting off slow in some of their games this year.
UConn is a 23-point favorite to start the game, to start this. That's on our friends at FanDuel. Thank you for that. What I will say about this DePaul team is we talk about, I remember I had said at the beginning of the show about how basketball teams schedule themselves wins. If you look at DePaul's schedule, again, totally warranted. Chris Holtzman is doing an amazing job. He's also a psychopath like Dan Hurley, so it's not surprising that he's having success but the names of teams that they beat are South Indiana, I think that almost went into overtime, but they won their home opener. They beat Prairie View, who's typically a very low-level HBCU squad. Mercer, who is in a down year in the SoCon. Duquesne, a down year in the A-10. Eastern Illinois, another mid-major. Northern Illinois, another mid-major. And then Valpo, usually pretty good. They beat them soundly. They haven't beat actually, I would consider Wichita State an upper-level American squad. So they've only have one quality win of the 10 that they have. So kudos to that, or 9 wins. So they haven't won in conference yet. It would be shocking to me if I almost said the Giants, if UConn doesn't cover the spread. But I could see them having lulls, because that's their biggest issue right now, is just they're doing well defensively, but if they don't score, then they kind of allow a team like DePaul with their 3-point shooting to kind of stick around. And I'm hoping that by the end of the first half, we're seeing the UConn squad that I think we all believe they can be. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think this should be a game that they should handily win. I think that there's a talent discrepancy in general. I just think UConn's a better team. And I think that's ultimately going to come into play here. But I do agree with you that it gets a little bit bothersome when they just kind of become complacent and they just almost kind of display a lack of effort on the other side of the ball when they're not scoring, and it gets frustrating to watch. And you can't really allow a team that is known to hit those threes pretty consistently to use that to climb back into the game. So it's almost like UConn has to just get a comfortable lead early and be able to maintain that level of consistency offensively. And if you even think about it too, like a guy like Caravan, like when he's not scoring, it's like everybody, it's like the end of the world for like for a lot of people here. I think he needs to be consistent and be able to make his shots. And I think that is something that over the rest of the season is going to play a big factor, not only in just this game, but moving forward. But I think it'll be a game that fans shouldn't have to stress about, really. Like there are other Big East matchups that I think are going to be and already have been more competitive. I don't think we're going to see like a 4-point win or going into overtime and hanging on by a thread type of win. I think that they should pretty handily win this game, if not by 23, at least by double digits.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I always have to caution. I've talked to thousands, I shouldn't say thousands, hundreds of coaches over the years, and they all said the same thing. Every road game is a challenge. And that's what this is. And you saw it at the Butler game. They looked like they were going to blow their doors off, and they kind of let them hang around. You get comfortable at home, anything can happen. I still think you're right, though. That I think the talent level of DePaul and UConn's is too steep a hill for them to climb. I think athletically, I think their front court is really going to dominate with Terrace Reed and Sampson as the duo there. The one game Sampson missed, you're 1,000% right. We missed him. There should be no Sampson slander for anything. He is an absolute force. He's leading the country in field goal percentage. I think he's second in block shots. He's being challenged more than Donovan Clingan was for obvious reasons, but he just keeps his foul trouble in order. And UConn's really got something with him and Terrace as a tandem.
Yeah, I did see a lot of Sampson slander early on in the year because of all those fouls, which I get. It was frustrating for sure. But if he can keep that in check, I mean, he's a really special player, and it's pretty obvious the difference that he makes to this team when he's out there.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to it. And Gabby, I really appreciate you stopping by and chatting some UConn all around today on a New Year's Eve special. If you ever want a disenfranchised Yankee fan to come on your show and talk Red Sox Yankees, I'm happy to jump on and wear I'll wear like a full Yankee outfit so people can get upset about it, and I'll be happy to do it for you if you like.
Yeah, no, thank you. This was so much fun. Always definitely love talking UConn with people because I don't get to do it enough really since I host a baseball show, but I definitely do appreciate it. We'll definitely have to do something like that because I think that could be a lot of fun too. Kind of move our expertise over to a completely different sport altogether in baseball and kind of share our thoughts there.
For sure. All right. Well, this has been another episode of Locked On UConn for Gabby Maljanian. I am Mark Zanetto. We're asking you to stay locked on, stay connected, make sure those toughness readers are always rising. And as always, go Huskies.